A lot of listeners might think podcasts are boring because they feel like the host is putting on a mask. And if you want to avoid that and show up real, honest, and totally you, this is the episode for you. Trust me, you're going to want to hear this one. Welcome to the Podcast Cafe, where we're serving up everything you need to know about podcasting, from tips, stories, and strategies for podcasters from podcasters. I'm your host, Haley Hayhurst, the founder of Espresso Podcast Production, a full-service podcast agency helping business owners, creatives, and thought leaders launch and grow their shows. Whether you're just starting out or want to take your podcast to the next level, this is the place for you. Each week, we'll dive into practical tips, actionable strategies, and of course, stories from other podcasters so that you can build up a podcast that you love and that works for your business. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's get started. Welcome to the Podcast Cafe. Today, I'm sitting down with Alisha Kumar, the host of Here for a Good Time podcast, to dive into her unfiltered approach to podcasting, how she balances life and business, and her secrets to connecting with her listeners on a deeper level. A little bit more about Alisha before we dive in. Alisha Kumar is a serial entrepreneur and voted least likely to shut up. Alisha's podcast is called Here for a Good Time, and that's really what it's all about. From dating, breakups, friendships, health and wellness, and so much more. Her podcast really gives an insight into what it's like to be here for a good time. I will note that Alicia's previous episodes are all about this topic, but she is in a little bit of a rebranding right now to tie in her ads agency and business into her show. So be sure to follow her on Instagram to keep up to date with that. But this conversation is so good. It's just, if you want to show up as who you really are and connect with your audience on a deeper level, which most podcasters are not doing, and if they're trying it, they're not doing it very successfully. So this episode shows you exactly how Alicia does that and how you can do it too, because it is possible. All right, enjoy this episode. Hey, Alicia, welcome to the Podcast Cafe. I'm so excited to be talking all things podcast with you today.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here and I can't wait for this convo.
Yeah, me too. Okay, I have a big question for you to start off. What is your go-to order at a coffee shop?
Ooh, my go-to is I'm kind of boring. I just like a either iced or hot Americano, depending on the
Hmm.
day. I have like vibes, and so it has to match the vibe. But with a splash of cream. That's it.
Okay, that is a classic order. I love that. I'm
Right.
an iced coffee girly year round. So, I mean, being in Seattle, because we're both in this area, sometimes it's not the opportune time for iced coffee, but like at heart, I am an iced coffee girl.
No, I totally get it. Even on like some really cold days, I'm like, you know what? I just need that like iced coffee going through my veins right now, as opposed to something hot. I'm probably gonna get
Yeah.
a hot flash from. So
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, I hope that the listeners grab their iced Americanos or whatever it is that they're drinking and are ready for this conversation because we are talking all about your amazing podcast today. So, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit more about your show?
yeah, so it's called Here for a Good Time. The premise around it is that we are here for a good time, not a long time. And so it is just capturing moments of my life, my adventures through dating, relationships, health and wellness, all of that, along with the guests and their stories as well. And so it's just kind of become this like hodgepodge of storytelling and really fun adventures and comedy, along with sometimes tears. And so it's been fun. It's been fun, but it's been a wild ride.
It's been a good time, you could
Yes.
say.
Yes.
I love that. So, if you had to describe your podcast in 3 words, what would it be?
I would say humorous, spicy, and I would probably say raw.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that those are great, especially since in your bio and in your branding, you say that you're like the big sister that people can come to and listen to.
Mhm.
And I think that is such a cool way to position yourself because listening to your podcast, truly it is big sister advice. I'm a big sister, and sometimes I need big sister advice. So it's nice to have a place to go and listen to that, definitely. But I want to talk to you today about showing up authentically and how you show up authentically on your show and in your life while still running a business. Because that's how we met. We met through your event, the Founders Table, and it is a professional event, but it's always nice to tie in your own personality to whatever it is that you're doing.
Mhm.
So I think you have a really cool opportunity with your podcast because you're interviewing people you've met through your business or like your friends, like you were saying earlier before we pressed record, and you're getting them to build this deeper connection with you because you're not just talking about those surface items, right? You're really getting into their life, dating, whatever it might be with them. And I think that is such an amazing, like refreshing way that business owners can turn to comedy podcasts. Would you have to agree with that? Is that kind of your plan when you first started?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was in my plan when I first started. When I first started the idea of the podcast, which was actually back in 2021, and I hadn't launched until 2023. So I
Mhm.
sat on the idea for a really long time because there was so much of this anxiety around being a business owner and a face of not only my business, which is the marketing agency, but also communities as well that I had at that time or have now. And so it was kind of getting over that along with, I mean, this is a tale as old as time, but in the Indian culture, there's a saying of like, what will people say? And so that was always in the back of my mind as well, in terms of not only my business and my clients or partners or anything like that, but also family and friends. And so it was this struggle back and forth of, do I do this? Do I not? Maybe I tone it back a bit. And then my therapist was also like, oh, if you can't tell your first date about your podcast, and he won't be able to go through the first 5 episodes like without being like, what the heck, then just don't put it out there. And I was like, that's the worst advice. I'm going to do the opposite as per usual, but everything in my life. So it was a struggle to kind of get over that mindset of like, hey, you're human at the end of the day. There's literally everybody going through this. There's not a single person who isn't going through at least one of these things, whether it's a breakup with a friendship or a guy or a girl or something to do with their health and wellness. And so just I think it was humanizing me
Mhm.
as a business owner as well, and not just somebody behind the agency. So there was that aspect of it too, which I was like, okay, let's give her and see what happens.
Yeah. And what has happened? Tell us like some of the results that you've seen or the feedback that you've heard or like what tell us more about those results.
Yeah, so the feedback has always been positive.
Yeah.
I've always had women come up to me after listening to the podcast and saying, "Thank you for talking about this because I didn't know how to approach it, or I'm dealing with the same thing in my relationship, or I had to break up with a friendship as well. We were going through something." I actually had one of my best friends on there, and we had gone through this like rough patch in our friendship. And we had no idea how to navigate it because it was one of those friends where we're like, this shouldn't happen to us. How is it happening to us? However, it's probably my most listened to podcast because I think what happens in the girl world is we go through these breakups with friendships and they hurt so much more than any sort of love relationship. And we don't know how to navigate it because deep down inside, the like mean girl in us probably wants to be like, oh my gosh, I'm never talking to them again. However, in this situation, it was like, no, we want to talk to each other again. We want to get this friendship back on track. And so, what did that look like? And it was a lot of us swallowing our ego. And I think that has to do with being on a podcast as well, is swallowing your pride and your ego and bringing the shit to the table that sometimes kind of sucks.
I 100% agree with that. I mean, we're putting ourselves out there. You so more than so my podcast, my previous podcast is all about business.
Hmm.
And I don't really share a lot about myself online. I mean, I'll share photos of my dog and like me at coffee shops, but that's not who I am. And on my personal pages, of course I share who I am. But as a business owner, I never have, and I honestly don't know if I ever will.
Hmm.
But I 100% agree with you. Like, you showing up in this way is inspiring to other people. And it, it shows that you are more than just a business owner, like you were saying. And we know each other. Like, we've gone to coffee and like we've met at multiple events. And the fact that you have this podcast does make me feel more open to like chatting with you about stuff. I mean, and I'm sure that's your experience with a lot of people because I'm like, "Oh, I'm just gonna go talk about business." No, I wanna know, like, know more about Alicia, and I want her to know about me and all of these cool things, and so it does do that humanizing aspect that you're really talking about.
Totally. Yeah. It's been a fun ride in terms of getting to know more people and their story as well, and having that safe space and creating that safe space for them to not only share their experiences, but also ask questions. So, like, I'll get questions in the DMs about things. And for strangers to come into my world and open up like that and ask questions that sometimes we are even embarrassed to ask our own friends is so powerful to me. And I know at the end of the day, and I always say this with my podcast or any of my businesses, is if it's helped one person, then like I'm okay. And so yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I wanna go back to where you were talking about the mindset of launching, and before you launched and speaking with your therapist and taking 2 years to that's a really common thing that I hear
Mhm.
in the podcasting world. People will get on calls with me and they're like, "I've been thinking about this for 4 years." And I'm like, "Okay, well, let's make this happen," because that's a long time to have something, like, taking up space in your head. I feel like it's easier just to create it and figure
Mhm.
out if it is for you or not for you. So, when you were in that planning phase and worried about judgment, does your family listen to your podcast? I have to ask.
No, so they know I do have a podcast. My sister knows like the premise of it because she's one of my closest friends and
Mhm.
obviously my sister. She's 8 years younger though, but and she probably doesn't want to listen to majority of the episodes because she's like, I get it. You always date losers. But no, my parents know I have a podcast. They don't understand quite the concept of it, and I am praying to God they never listen to it unless it's like an interview episode with somebody else that has nothing to do with my life. And so, but I think it does come back to, oh my gosh, what are my parents going to say? Like, I'm sure in the back of their
Mhm.
head, they know that like I've gone through heartbreak and dated all these weirdos and had sex, but they don't want to listen to that. Like, they don't want to know that I'm talking about how to like squat on somebody. What? No.
Right, right. And I'm sure even if they did tune in, they would tune out real fast.
I would hope so. I mean, their ears would probably bleed. That's when I
Yeah.
would come home to go visit my parents, and they would probably be crying on this
That's
sofa.
so funny. They'd be like, "We're going to church right now."
Yeah, no, I know. You're getting sent back straight. So yeah. But
No.
it is what it is. I think it's also given a space though for South Asian women to have a space and understand that like these things are happening to us as well. And we can't always relate to all the other podcasts out there because of our culture and how things are viewed. And so just also pushing the boundaries when it comes to that status as well and being like, hey, I see you, I understand you, I am you, and here's my experience with it, and hopefully it can help you a little bit.
Yeah. Before we move on to how you grow your podcast and market it and all of those fun things, I want to hear if you have one tip for aspiring podcasters who are in that space where they have this idea, but they are afraid of judgment or cultural judgment, family judgment, whatever it might be. Do you have advice for them?
Yes, and it's always the same thing, and it's such a cliche saying of nobody who's doing better than you is ever going to be critiquing you or judging you. And so just remember that regardless of whether you're starting a podcast, creating content, starting a business, nobody doing better than you will ever have time to do that. And so just do the dang thing. Like just do it, apply yourself. If it works out great, then amazing. If you hate it, then leave it and at least you got to try that, but just remember that there's always going to be people judging. However, it's never the right people who are judging.
Oh my gosh, I just got goosebumps. That's so good. That's so good. Okay, wow. Well, let's move on to marketing and growth and really how you get some listeners onto your show. So, I know you promote on Instagram.
Mhm.
What are your main ways that you market here for a good time?
Yeah, so it's usually through Instagram. It has an email list. However, I need to get on that stat. I think I've sent like one email, which is ridiculous. But you know, those like waves of like emails and marketing that you go through, and you're like, oh, yeah, this is amazing. And I'm doing all the things. And then one month you're like, "Oh, I hate this. And I'm going to put one post up
Yes.
to let people know I'm alive." I'm kind of coming out of that and being like, okay, I'm excited about the podcast again. However, when we first launched, as a marketer, I decided to gift, I think it was like 10 or 12 of my friends who had large audiences, who were probably ideal target audiences with PR packages. And so I had these long sleeves in there, which are like my signature long sleeves, and it had like here for a good time down the side, and it said the podcast. It had a drink card for one of my favorite drinks. And we played around with a name for that. And then I sent little Tabasco bottles, but they were rebranded. And
Cute.
it said things are about to get spicy and here for a good time. So, and stickers and all these things. So it was like this PR package that everybody was so amazed when they were opening and then also sharing on social for the launch day. And so, yeah, it was super exciting that I was able to do something like that. And so that drummed up a lot of followers and a lot of interest, a lot of downloads. And then it was, yeah, just getting guests on there who were the right fit and marketing through their channels as well, collaborating that way. But I would say Instagram's probably my main form on that, and also Pinterest, actually.
Mm. I know that Pinterest is good for podcasters just because of that searchability. I'll have to have someone on the show who's a Pinterest expert,
Yeah,
but do you recommend that for anyone with, like a comedy lifestyle podcast?
totally. I mean, you can drive traffic from Pinterest anywhere. But my next channel is probably YouTube. I
Mm.
mean, that's tried, true, and tested. And so, yeah, we're playing around with things. I think you always have to be open to trying new things when it comes to the podcasting world because it does change and it's such a new thing too, right? Like podcasting isn't something that's been around for decades and decades and decades. It's new fairly. And so yeah, there's always shifts and changes that you have to adapt to. So just try what you go where you want to watch podcasts or listen to podcasts and then hang out there.
I agree with that. I mean, you could go heavy into video and the repurposing aspect, or you could keep it to audio only or a mix of the both. I mean, there's no right or wrong way to podcast. That's what I always tell my clients. Like, whatever you're going to stay consistent with or whatever excites you is what you should do. I have clients that are like, I should be on TikTok. And I'm like, okay, well, let's be on TikTok. And they're like, I hate TikTok. And I'm like, okay, well, let's not be on TikTok. Like, it's as easy as that, you know? Like, if you have like this visceral reaction to something, don't do it because that's going to lead to burnout in your podcast. And that is a real thing. And so, definitely, I think that's great advice of promote where you feel good promoting. And on Instagram, you have great branding. Did you do all your branding yourself?
No, it was my friend Stacy, who owns a branding, podcasting, and website company. She's done all my branding across all of my businesses, along with our websites and everything like that. So yeah, I pretty much just told her what it was really wild. I told her what I wanted the podcast to be about and gave her the vibes of the podcast. And she's been there since day one, even before I had a name or anything like that. And it was, yeah, just the vibes and stuff. And she came out with the branding, and I was like, this is it. This one is it. And so, same with the name too. We were on a call, and she was like, how do you want people to feel? And I was like, I want them to feel like they're here for a good time. And I was like, hold on, might have something here. And so we did like some trademark searches and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, let's run with this. Let's go.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think that's great that you had someone do your branding because that is a place that holds a lot of people back from,
Mhm.
starting their podcast. And you just mentioned trademarks, and I know your trademark just came in.
Yeah.
So, congratulations on that. Why did you decide to do a trademark for your show?
Oh my gosh, why wouldn't I? I trademark everything. Like when I tell you I trademark everything, it is everything before I launch it. That's like one of the first things that I do is check the trademark directory. Well, I don't, my lawyer does, but he goes and checks everything, make sure it's good to go. And then kind of going from there, because the last thing I would want to do is grow this brand and then have somebody come out of the woodwork and be like, actually, we were using this or we've been using this as well. Long time ago or however that looks. And so it just gets messy. And I was like, I want to own everything under this podcast. And so, yeah, I trademarked that along with a product that I am working on behind the scenes, which I'm really excited for. And so, yeah, 10 out of 10 would recommend trademarking everything you do for sure.
I love that. And you do have some merch and products, and I think that's great because that is a way that you can monetize the show
Mhm.
and also make people like you're walking billboards a little bit, you know? Like,
Right?
and I think like here for a good time is so cool because everyone is here for a good time and
Totally.
it does catch eyes. And so definitely on a t-shirt, I would go look it up for sure. When did you decide to I know you said during your launch you decided to do all these products, but how do you have time to balance all of this? You know, creating products, creating a weekly podcast, finding guests, and still running your ads agency?
Mhm. Outsourcing the heck out of everything. I don't do obviously any of my branding. I'm not a graphic designer, so I have a graphic designer who does all of our graphics on that you see on our page. And so just making sure those are all things that are being done that I don't have to worry about. Same with editing. I don't want to learn editing. And so I have an editor who does everything. And then my assistant just, once I record, I literally hand it off to her and she makes sure that everything is not only edited, but the graphics are made and they're ready to go. So, yeah, it's a lot of outsourcing, and I have no problem doing that. It has been a bit hard though, because the podcast isn't monetized the way that I would want it to down the road. But I know if I do these things now and like set myself up, then I won't have to play catch up kind of down the road.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, it's been outsourcing strategically though. Sometimes I'm like, do I
absolutely.
really need this? Like, do I need a month of graphics? And we're kind of switching up the cadence of our content. And so, yeah, pulling back a bit more on the graphics and going more into video content now, because I just think that's what's working online. And so there's so many like really good juicy moments that are said on the podcast, and I'm like, "Oh, this why wouldn't this be an ad right now?" Like, hello, my mind goes there
Mhm.
right away. So, yeah, just playing around. Like I said before, you have to try a bunch of new things and see what sticks.
You do, and to your point, like, podcasts do not monetize overnight unless you have, like, media agency that bought your show or is working with you and, you know, they kind of own it. So,
Mhm.
that is a big part where, like, a lot of my clients outsource to me before they're making money on their show. Either I'm helping them launch it or edit it or whatever it might be, and so, like you're saying, 100%, like, if they started it on their own, they definitely could, but they're able to take that time to use it in marketing or promotion or what other parts of their business that will then make them money into their show. So I think that's a really good point that you just brought up.
Totally. And on top of that, like, why I know that if I didn't outsource those things and I had to learn it on my own, I probably wouldn't have made it past like 3 episodes, if that. And this would have just been like another idea.
You know, that's actually the stat that most podcasts drop off after 3 episodes.
No way.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh, wild. Okay,
100%.
well, I would have been part of that stat easily.
It's like tons. I would say the majority of podcasts drop off after 3, and then there's another round that drops off after 10, and really that's kinda like the stopping point because of what you're
Mhm.
saying. So that's really funny because that is literally what happens.
Oh my gosh, well, I mean, this was all planned and it worked out perfectly. No, but I honestly had no idea that it was 3. I thought it would at least be like 10 to 20.
Mm-mm.
Wow.
Crazy, right? No, but it is hard. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it's not hard, it's just time consuming, especially
Mhm.
if you have other things to focus on, but podcasts bring so many opportunities that it's worth it, in my
Totally.
opinion.
Yeah.
So, what has your biggest challenge been? Let's talk about, like, the challenges around this.
Yeah, so challenges have been being consistent with recording and just sitting my ass down and recording. I usually go through these like waves of it'll be 8 p.m. on a Sunday and I'm recording a podcast and it's out of nowhere. So it's being a little more disciplined in getting those interviews planned and scheduled, being strategic with who I want on the episode and what I want it to look like, along with probably once again, it's the mindset thing of like getting over, oh, frick, did I like say the right thing or should I have shared that? There was actually a moment on the podcast about 2 weeks ago where I shared something and I had texted somebody that I shouldn't have texted. And I didn't think my assistant listens to the whole podcast when it's done editing and stuff. I mean, why wouldn't she? But she of course does. And on the podcast, I literally said, I texted this person and I really hope my assistant isn't listening to this because I could hear her stomping up my stairs, just so freaking pissed that I did this. And lo and behold, she was listening to it and she texted me and she's like, "Yeah, I am listening." And I was like, "What is she talking about?" And then I was like, "Oh no."
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So there's moments where I'm like, oh, because I think there's also, I mean, being in the business world as well, you want to be held to a certain standard. And when you do share these vulnerable parts of yourself because you are human and you are going to send that text that you shouldn't have, or, do the walk of shame or whatever it is, it's hard to get over, like, oh frick, like what are people going to think? Like, are they also shaking their head at me? Do they want to stomp up my stairs and be like, "Girlfriend, what are you doing?" But at the same time, I think it's just like, it makes it normal. It's normalizing that, like, yeah, we did send that text and it's okay because I'm not the only person that does that. And so, yeah, it's been a lot of challenging moments of fighting the urge to say something and then saying it and being like, "Oh shit, did I say the right thing? Did I not offend anybody?" That's, I think, another thing is, I hope I didn't offend anybody, because there's only so
Mhm.
much that we can convey in a podcast without rambling as well. And so there's so many times where I'm like, "Oh shoot, I hope this doesn't come across a certain way." And I wouldn't ever want anybody to feel a certain way on the podcast. So it's a lot of, yeah, watching what you're saying and how you're saying it.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get into my rapid fire question section, I would love to hear a little bit more about how, when you were planning your podcast, how you planned out who's going to listen, because that's a place where I have realized some podcasters really focus on and some don't. So, where were you in the spectrum of like, I have my ideal listener to a T, or I'm just putting this out and seeing who comes?
So I kind of had the ideal listener to a T. It was probably women in like their 20s, 30s, 40s as well. And so I had that in mind. I did want to at one point have a co-host. So I actually started the podcast back in 2021, going into the idea and stuff with a co-host, and decided that we are actually very different in terms of how we work, and it was going to be a disastrous idea. And so going into that, though, we did want guys on the podcast, and I would love to have a male guest or a few of them having their perspective as well. Because my guy friends always give me like the best advice, I feel, or it's always like the most raw advice. They just don't care.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, just started off with that. I feel like I've always kind of just been like a girl's bestie in a way. And so, yeah, I had that in mind. I mean, I do get creepy guy listeners, and they're always so creepy. I get the weirdest messages from them. I could do an episode just on that. But yeah, I knew I just wanted to be like the safe space for girls to get big sister advice. I probably don't even have like advice to give guys. Do you know what I mean? Because it would be like the craziest advice of me just probably yelling at them, being like, "Why are you the way you are?"
No, that's literally me giving my little sister advice. I'm like, "What? Like, what is going on with you?" But I think that is big sister advice, honestly.
Right? No. It's so funny because my sister's younger than me. However, she's the one who's always giving me that
Mm,
advice. She's
yeah.
way more sound, than I am for sure.
I mean, there always has to be a balance, right?
Right? No, totally, for sure.
No. But okay, I love that. I mean, it is important to think about who's going to be listening to your show so then you can effectively market. And I'm sure when you worked with the branding specialist to create your branding, she probably asked you a lot of those questions too.
Mhm.
So I think that that is great advice because it is important to have an idea, but still, as you've been saying throughout this episode, like be open to new things, be open to flexibility. Don't feel stuck in whatever you're doing. Like, test out different things.
Right? That's what life's about anyway, so
It really is. It really is. Okay, well, I'm excited because I have 8 questions for you, and I'm gonna ask you them, and whatever you think, just tell us, and
okay,
they're all about podcasting.
okay.
Okay, perfect. All right, let's get started. So, what's the first podcast that you ever listened to?
The first podcast that I listened to was probably Call Her Daddy.
Oh my gosh, me too.
I'm like, it tracks.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I could do a whole episode talking about, like, the evolution of Call Her Daddy, but if you look into it, it's it's a journey.
Right? I
Go her.
know. Yeah,
I
she
want to
stayed
become Alex Cooper.
consistent throughout the whole thing, and she actually, I heard, edited her own episodes until very,
Hmm.
very recently, which was so cool to hear, that she was so involved in it.
Absolutely. That is really cool. I love that. Okay. So I'm too chatty to do rapid fire. Okay,
I
let's
know,
keep going.
I'm sorry, keep going.
Okay, what is your favorite podcast genre besides your own?
I would say murder mystery.
I love that. What's the best advice you've ever received about podcasting?
To keep going and don't mind what people say.
Mm. Who's your dream podcast guest out of anyone in the whole world?
My dream podcast guest would probably be Justin Bieber.
Oh, I love that. What is one podcast that you recommend everyone listen to?
It is probably, what am I listening to right now? Oh, I want to say, is it Almost 30s?
Yeah, I want to have them on the show, honestly.
Yes.
What is your biggest pet peeve as a podcast listener?
As a listener, I think when they go off topic or it's supposed to be about a certain topic and it has nothing to do with that. And now you're just in this rabbit hole of 30 minutes of your life being taken up and you're like, what did I just listen to? There we go.
Okay, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I feel the same. I have lots of podcast pet peeves, but I think it's just because I'm in this world all day.
But that's your industry though. There's so many ad pet peeves that I have that I see on the daily that I'm like, oh,
Yeah. Oh my gosh. What's your favorite podcast listening platform?
I'd say Spotify. Please sponsor
Mhm.
me.
I have the last one. Okay. What is the most surprising thing you've learned from podcasting?
How real and open people are willing to get when you have them on as a guest and how much of their life they're willing to share and want to share to help others along the way. It's just been mind-blowing of them being so comfortable in the space and being able to share these things that might help somebody along their journey regardless of what topic we're talking about.
I love that. I love that. Oh my gosh, Alicia, that was so much fun.
Right? I know, I know. We are definitely chatty Cathy's and rapid fire was clearly not for us.
No, I mean, we made it through though, and I love that for us.
Right?
That's so funny. Okay, well, I have absolutely loved this conversation. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
I don't think so. Besides, like, tell me what you think of the podcast. Tell me what you think of this
Mhm.
episode. DM me. And if you have any questions, obviously slide in. I'm happy to answer.
Perfect. So, my very last question for you, and this ties into my previous podcast, Employee to Boss. At the end of that conversation, every single episode, I have like 127 over there or something right now. I ask what 3 action steps the audience can take based on our conversation,
Hmm.
and I would love to tie that into this podcast as well about podcasting because this is podcasting is something that you could think about for years before you even start. So, what are 3 things that you would love the audience to do this week to move forward with their podcasting goals?
Yeah, I would say if you are new to podcasting and you don't have a show yet, do a brain dump of all the topics that you're interested in. And then from there, figure out what you can talk about for a long period of time. And then go from there and narrow it down. If there's stuff that you are interested in, but you couldn't hold a conversation on, let that go, cross it out, and then just start building from there. Two, try and figure out a name and your branding and who you want to appeal to. It's going to be different depending on who your audience is and how you want the podcast to feel. And then three, which is my advice for anybody starting a business or a podcast or anything, is legal work. Get get those trademarks filed and get your finances in place to make sure that you'll be able to sustain this past episode 3.
I love that. Oh my gosh, this has been really fun. Alicia, where can the audience find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Here for a Good Time Podcast, and that'll lead you to my personal along with all of my other ventures as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show. And for all the listeners, the links will be in the show notes as well as more details about Alicia's ventures, like the founders table and her ads agency, if you want to know a little bit more about her. But I appreciate you taking this time to share all of your podcasting advice. This has been a good time.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
Thank you so much for joining me in the Podcast Cafe. I hope you're leaving with fresh ideas and inspiration to take your podcast to the next level. Remember, podcasting is a journey and you don't have to do it alone. I'm here to help you every step of the way. Let's connect. Be sure you follow me on Instagram at Espresso Podcast Production or visit espressopodcastproduction.com for more tips, resources, and behind the scenes insights. I'd love to hear about your podcasting journey. If you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling extra generous, I'd love it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps more podcasters just like you find the show. Until next time, grab your coffee, keep creating, and I'll see you back here in the Podcast Cafe.